All right, let's dive into a book that basically threw a bomb into the world of design more than 50 years ago. And believe me, the shockwaves are still being felt. We're talking about Victor Papanek's Design for the Real World. It's this fierce, controversial, and honestly, brilliant takedown of a profession he believed had totally lost its way. And he kicks things off with a statement so blunt, you just have to stop and listen. Papanek does not ease you in. That is the very first sentence of his book. No warm-up, no apology. Right from the get-go, he's making it crystal clear that this is not going to be a comfortable read. He is flat out accusing designers, the people who create the chairs we sit in, the phones we use, the cars we drive, of being part of a uniquely dangerous profession. And that immediately brings up the question, right? How can that be? It sounds like a massive exaggeration. Harmful? I mean, how can making something look nice or feel comfortable be dangerous? Well, that's the central conflict Papanek wants us to wrestle with. He's asking us to look past all the pretty objects and see the system behind them. A system he argues is built on waste, vanity, and sometimes even death. Okay, so let's break down his case. In this first part, we're going to explore Papanek's diagnosis of what he saw as a deeply, deeply sick profession. Why on earth did he believe industrial design had become so dangerous? So the heart of his accusation is this. Designers had just stopped solving real problems for real people. Instead, he saw them as servants to corporate greed, using their incredible talents to pump out what he called tawdry idiocies. The gadgets and status symbols that don't really serve any purpose other than to be sold, usually by convincing people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have. And what's kind of wild is how specific Papanek gets. These aren't just made-up examples. These were actual products being designed and sold when he was writing. An oven that plays a song when your roast is done. Mink carpeting for your bathroom. It sounds completely absurd, and that is exactly his point. He saw these things as proof of a profession that was just completely out of touch with the urgent, real-world problems facing humanity. And the engine fueling all these tawdry idiocies is a concept Papanek called artificial obsolescence. This is the heart and soul of consumerism. And look, this isn't just about things breaking down over time. This is about intentionally designing a product to fail, or, and this is even sneakier, designing it to just go out of style. The classic example he used was the car industry's styling cycle, where they'd make cosmetic changes every few years just to make your perfectly good car look old, pushing you to constantly upgrade. It creates this endless cycle of buying and wasting, and the designer is the one making it all happen. But Papanek's critique goes way beyond just being wasteful. It gets into matters of life and death. This number, it's just staggering. He wasn't talking about style choices anymore. He was pointing to design decisions made just to save a few bucks that resulted in criminally unsafe products. Badly designed steering columns, gas tanks that could explode, helmets that don't actually absorb impact. In his view, these weren't accidents. They were the direct result of a design philosophy that put profit way ahead of human safety. Now, after a diagnosis that scathing, you'd think Papanek has zero hope for the future of design. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The second half of his book is all about the solution. He doesn't just tear everything down. He lays out this powerful alternative vision for what design could and really should be. So what was the alternative? Well, it was pretty simple, really. Papanek suggested that designers just turn their attention away from the wealthiest 10% of the world and start working for the other 90%. This meant focusing on the elderly, the poor, people with disabilities, and communities in developing nations, all groups who are pretty much completely ignored by the mainstream market because they're not seen as a big source of profit. And this example just perfectly illustrates the difference. On one hand, you've got a toy Papanek found especially disgusting, the Dynamite Shack, which literally taught kids that blowing up a building was entertainment. Then, on the other hand, you have a project from one of his students, a simple cloth book for an infant's sensory development, different textures, colors, squeaky things. But here's the absolute genius part. The design was also a manufacturing system, a simple tool that allowed the books to be put together by blind people, giving them meaningful work. That's integrated design, solving two real problems for two overlooked groups with one single elegant idea. And these kinds of projects just poured out of his classes. I mean, they weren't designing more stylish toasters. They were tackling real, tangible problems. Just think about it. A cheap insert that could turn a regular family car into a working ambulance in an emergency. Or a cooler for developing nations that didn't need any electricity. Just 20 minutes of hand cranking kept produce from rotting for half a day.
These weren't just clever ideas, they were life-changing interventions for people whose needs were being completely ignored.
Now, this wasn't just some let's do good philosophy. Papanek's approach was rooted in a really practical and rigorous methodology. He believed the best design solutions weren't just invented in a studio somewhere. They were discovered by looking really, really closely at the world around us.
A key tool in his toolbox was something called bionics. And the idea here is that nature, through millions of years of evolution, has already solved a ton of our most complex design problems. I mean, why reinvent the wheel when you can just study the super elegant, super efficient systems that are all around you in the natural world? It's about finding the principle behind how something in nature works and then applying that to a human problem. And the absolute perfect example of this is Velcro, right? This wasn't some random invention. It came from an engineer who noticed how these little cocklebur seeds stuck to his dog's fur after a walk. He didn't just copy the seed, he looked at it under a microscope. He figured out the principle of thousands of tiny hooks clinging to loops of fur, and then he just replicated that system with nylon. From a seed to a product. That is biononics in action.
Another huge part of his method was just tearing down the idea of the lone genius designer. He was a huge champion of what he called integrated design. This meant bringing together teams of experts, sociologists, anthropologists, engineers, doctors, and, this is the most important part, including the actual users, the client group, as equal members of the team from day one. His point was, a designer sitting in an office in New York has no business designing a plow for a farmer in Pakistan unless that farmer is in the room with them. So after laying out the problem, and a pretty radical new way forward, Papanek leaves all of us with a challenge. And it wasn't just for designers, it was for every one of us, as consumers and as citizens. You know, what's so powerful about design for the real world is just how incredibly relevant it still is today. The specific products have changed, for sure. We might laugh at an electric hairbrush, but what about a smart water bottle or a Wi-Fi-enabled egg tray? Papanek gives us this timeless, critical lens. He basically teaches us to ask a totally different set of questions about the objects and systems that surround us every single day. And this is the question he leaves us with. Just look around your room right now. At your desk, your phone, the chair you're sitting in. Why does it look the way it does? Why does it work the way it does? Was it actually designed to make your life better, safer, more meaningful? Or was it designed to wear out, to impress your neighbors, to make you feel like you're not good enough so you'll go buy the next version? Papanek's challenge forces us to become conscious of the world we live in, and ultimately, to demand a better designed world, a world designed not for profit, but for people.